Hello friends, welcome to my channel, The Exploring Medicò. Today we will learn about infection and immunity. So, let's discuss some basic points related infection. It is invention and multiplication of microorganisms in a host constitutes an infection. The immune system in living organism is responsible for protecting them from invading foreign substance including pathogens. Now let's see what is pathogens. So it is organisms that are capable of producing disease in the host. Parasites. So parasites is microbes that can establish themselves and multiply in host. Commensal. Microbes that live in complete harmony with the host without causing any damage. Now, what is infection? So, it occurs when an organism enters the body and establishes itself, resulting in disease process in the host. The organism causing the disease is known as pathogen, and the process by which it attacks the host is called pathogenesis. So, infection is classified in various types. So, let's see one by one. Firstly, primary infection. It is initial infection in a host by parasite. Reinfection. It is subsequent infection by the same parasite in the host. Secondary infection. So, when new parasite causes an infection in a host whose resistance is lowered by pre-existing infection disease, for example, fungal infection. Focal infection. Focal infection here is also known as focal sepsis. So, it indicates a condition caused by infection or sepsis at localized sites, for example, appendicitis or tonsillitis. Cross infection. When a patient already suffering from one infection or a disease contracts a new infection which is transmitted from another host or another external source. Heterogenic infection. Heterogenic infection resulting from investigative, therapeutic, or other procedures which are physician induced, for example, abscess. Endogenous or exogenous infection. Depending on source of infection is from with or without or outside the host's own body, for example, peritonitis. Inapparent infection. Inapparent infection is also called as subclinical infection. It is an infection in which clinical effects are not apparent. Then, atypical infection. This refers to an infection in which the typical or characteristic clinical manifestations of particular infectious disease are not present. Latent infection. It is an infection in which some parasites remain in the tissue in latent or hidden form, proliferating and producing. So these were the types through which infection can be classified. Now, let us discuss some source of infection. It means from which sources infection could be affected. It is humans, by animals, by insects, or by environment. In humans, a parasite may originate from a patient or a carrier. And let's discuss some types of carriers. So it may be healthy carrier, convalescent carrier, temporary carrier, chronic carrier, contact carrier, and paradoxical carrier. These were the main sources of humans. Now let us discuss some animals and insect source of infection. So in animal, cattle, goat, sheep, dogs, horses and rats can be infect. Cattle can cause tetanus, anthrax, tuberculosis. Goat can cause brucellosis. Sheep can cause tetanus and anthrax. Dogs can cause rabies. Horse can cause tetanus and bladders. And rats can cause rat bite fever or Wells disease. So here tetanus and anthrax were mostly common in cattle, sheep and horses. Now let us discuss insects. So in biological or mechanical vector, it could be affect through house flies, body lice, mosquitoes, rat flea and ticks, and it causes typhoid fever. Body lice can cause typhus, mosquito can cause malaria, dengue fever, and rat flu can cause plague. Ticks can cause relapsing fever. Now we can discuss some methods of transmission of infection. It means through which it could be transmitted from one to another. It could be transmitted from contact, inhalational, ingestion, inoculation, congenital, heterogenic and laboratory infections. And it may be cause severe diseases like gonorrhea, food poisoning, dysentery, cholera, tetanus, rabies, etc. Now factors through which influencing virulence. It is adhesion, invasiveness, toxigenicity, genetic material, communicability and miscellaneous. These were the factors which is influencing the virulence. So friends, that were the infection portion. Now let us discuss some about immunity. So what is immunity basically? It is a resistance acquired by a host towards injury caused by microorganisms and their products. And immunity can be divided into mainly two types: innate immunity and adaptive immunity. Innate immunity is classified further in two more types: specific and non-specific. And adaptive is also further classified into two types. It is active and passive. So let us discuss innate immunity in detail. So it is basic resistance to infection which an individual possesses by virtue of his genetic and constitutional makeup, not affected by prior contact with organisms or immunization. Innate immunity is further divided into non-specific and specific. So non-specific is it indicates a degree of resistance to infections in general, and specific it is a resistance to a particular pathogen is concerned. Innate immunity is having different types. Let us discuss one by one. So in brief, species immunity, it is resistance to pathogen shown by all membranes of a particular species. For example, anthrax. Anthrax infects human beings but not chickens. Okay, anthrax is infectious for humans only. It could be not infect the chickens. Now, racial immunity. Within a species, different races may show difference in susceptibility to infections. It differs from species to species. For example, black people in Africa exhibit genetic resistance to Plasmodium falciparum malaria. Third one is individual immunity. It is resistance to infection varies with different individuals of same race and species. Means they have same race and species but resistance to immunity is varying. For example, homozygous twins exhibit similar resistance, susceptibility to leprosy and tuberculosis. Such correction is not seen in heterozygous twins. It is only observed in homozygous. As we discussed factors influencing virulence in the infection, same as we can discuss some factors influencing immunity, particularly innate immunity. So let us discuss one by one in briefly. Number 1, it could be influenced by age. In fetus, immune system is immature, but in old age there is a gradual waning of immune system. In hormone, enhanced susceptibility to infections such as diabetes mellitus, adrenal dysfunction, hypothyroidism in adults. So these were some examples of these factors. Thirdly, malnutrition predisposes to bacterial infection. Both hormonal and cell-mediated immune responses are reduced in malnutrition. Now let us discuss some mechanism of innate immunity. It is epithelial surface. Epithelial surface have subtypes like skin, respiratory tract. Skin, it acts as a mechanical barrier to microorganisms and provide bactericidal secretions. Resident microflora of skin and mucous membrane surface helps to prevent colonization by pathogens. Respiratory tract. Inhaled particles are arrested in the nasal passage on the moist mucous membrane surface. Cough reflex act as a defense mechanism. Intestinal tract. Mouth possesses saliva, which has an inhibitory effect on many microorganisms. Some bacteria are destroyed by acid pH of gastric juices. Conjunctiva. Tears contain lysozyme, which has antibacterial property. It helps in flushing away bacteria and other dust particles. Genitourinary tract. Flushing action of urine eliminates bacteria from urinary tract. Secondly, antibacterial substance. So it is present in the blood and tissue like complement, lysozyme, beta-lysine have antibacterial and interferon which have antiviral activity. So complement and lysozyme has antibacterial and interferon has antiviral activity. Thirdly, cellular factor. When infection cross the barrier of epithelial surface, tissue factor come into play for defense. Accumulation of phagocytes. At the site of infection and engulfment of microorganisms and destroy them. Inflammation. It is a main subtype. Inflammation occurs as a result of tissue injury or irritation. Mark this point, okay? It's a non-specific defense mechanism. Inflammation leads to vasodilatation, increased vascular permeability and cellular infiltration. Microorganisms are phagocytosed and destroyed. Fever. Fever is a rise of temperature following infection is natural defense mechanism. It's just natural defense, okay? It destroys the infecting organisms. Fever also stimulates the production of interferon, which helps in recovery from viral infection. Acute phase protein. So, following infection or injury, there is a sudden increase in plasma concentration of certain proteins called acute phase protein. This includes c-reactive protein, mannose binding protein. They prevent tissue injury and promote repair of inflammation lesions. Now let us discuss adaptive immunity in detail. So we had discussed innate immunity. Now we will discuss about adaptive immunity. This is inductible and develops slowly than the innate response. This is also known as acquired immunity. So adaptive immunity is also known as acquired immunity. This is a specific kind of immunity and has memory, therefore providing long-term protection. So adaptive immunity provides long-term protection. This occurs with contact of foreign particles. Adaptive immunity is often subdivided into two major types depending on how the immunity was introduced. Number 1, naturally acquired immunity, and number 2, artificially acquired immunity. So it is naturally acquired. It occurs through contact with a disease causing agent and artificially develops through vaccination. So naturally occurs through any kind of diseases, and artificially acquired immunity occur through any type of vaccination we had done. So now let's discuss some types of adaptive immunity. So there were natural immunity, and natural immunity is subdivided into two basic types: natural acquired active immunity and natural acquired passive immunity. So active occurs when a person is exposed to a live pathogen, develops the disease and becomes immune as a result of primary immune response. And passive immunity, it occurs during pregnancy, in which certain antibodies are passed from the maternal into the fetal bloodstream. So it is a passively occurred. Now, through vaccinations, what could be effect to the immunity? So mainly there are three types of vaccine: live vaccine, killed vaccine, and bacterial product. So live vaccine could cause BCG for tuberculosis, Sabin vaccine for poliomyelitis, killed vaccine because hepatitis B vaccine, non-neural vaccine for rabies. Bacterial product causes tetanus toxoid vaccine, diphtheria toxoid for diphtheria. Now, if there is a question that difference between active and passive immunity, then we can write that induced by infection, and passive is conferred by administration of ready-made antibodies. In active immunity, effective only after lag period, and in passive immunity, effective immediately. Active immunity, immunological memories are present, but in passive immunity there is no immunological memory. In active immunity, negative phase may occur, but in passive there is no negative phase. In active immunity, it is not applicable to immunodeficient person, but passive immunity is applicable to immunodeficient person too. Active immunity is used for prophylaxis to increase body resistance, for example BCG vaccine, and passive immunity is used for treatment of acute infection. Now let us discuss about some autoimmunity. So it is a system of immune response of an organism against its own healthy cells and tissues. Any disease that results from such an aberrant immune response is termed as autoimmune disease. Some examples of autoimmune disease: so rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, type 1 diabetes mellitus, Graves' disease, and myasthenia gravis. These were some examples of autoimmune disease. So thank you friends for watching my video, and if you like this, please subscribe our channel and stay updated.